What's going on? Welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to talk to you about Lucid. I want to go over some of the current data points, break it down on what really moved it today, and everything else you need to know. But first, make sure you guys hit that thumbs up, and with that, let's get right to it. So Lucid did go down 1.63%, 232 the low, 244 the high. In reality, Lucid actually did do fairly well in comparison to a lot of other stocks, such as even Tesla went down 1.83, Rivian went down 3.81, and Lucid had this nice strong close. A lot of big institutions were getting in for whatever reason, most likely I guess going and transitioning into their earnings next week. But you did see Rivian relatively flat near the end of the day, as well as Tesla. So Lucid was getting some much needed buying, but nonetheless though, when it comes down to this suppression, a lot of that had to do with Trump's tariffs and also the data that did come out. So ISM manufacturing came in at 48, forecast was 49.4, so it is below that 50, showing more of a contraction rather than a expansion. Then you had unemployment coming in flat at 4.2, and then non-farm payroll 73,000 versus 110 the forecast. So overall, not good data. But because of all of this and kind of the escalation of fear, now the likelihood for the next meeting for September the 17th, there is now a 86.4% likelihood of a 25 basis point cut. This is up from 37.7 yesterday. And keep in mind, yesterday the market was digesting Powell's comments, which ultimately did state that in September they're not even looking at cuts yet. So this is kind of a good thing. Let me know your general thoughts on that. But I think even though this did go up, the market didn't fully price this in. If so, you would have saw a very nice recovery with many stocks. And Trump still very much hell-bent on kind of bringing down Powell. He did mention this, kind of interesting that he should be put out to pasture. So Powell, of course. So yeah, interesting kind of stuff. So hopefully for the next Fed meeting, we do see a 50 basis point cut rather than a 25. But in order for that to occur, I think things might have to get a little bit worse before they get better. So let me know your general thoughts on that. But aside from that, Lucid didn't put out any news, no SEC filings. The big catalyst that was supposed to be out, it just came out roughly like 20 minutes ago. And ultimately, for the estimated sales in the States, it did go up month over month between June and July, 27.69%, as what you can kind of see is posted by Lucid to the Moon. But ultimately, there is a little bit more of a red flag. And what I mean by that is for the month of July, you can kind of see 890 estimated sales in the States for Air, but 0 for Gravity. So now this is the second consecutive month where there is no Gravity sales. So the real question is, why? We've seen a lot of posts on social media saying and kind of showing Gravities in the wild, but no real context. Is that actual customers? Is that employees? Because I did see that they were letting employees kind of test drive and whatever else. So I don't really know exactly the basis of that. And I have also seen some posts saying that not all studios do have the Gravity. So maybe they're still trying to fulfill those before taking sales. I'm not really sure, but this definitely was not necessarily the best. So let me know your viewpoint. Do you think that this is a error, or do you think that they legitimately, for whatever reason, are not selling any Gravities? Potentially, again, that could be something that management does bring up next week for their upcoming earnings. But when it comes down to shorts, they did increase 4.9 million shares. 29.84% of the free float is being shorted. Works out to be 374.63 million shares overall are being shorted. And just generally looking at here, they were really hitting Lucid hard first thing, as you can kind of see. At its peak, almost increasing like 20 something million shares. So crazy day. But throughout the day, obviously you can kind of see that big drop. Shorts did return a significant amount, which did add this level of buying pressure. So shorts are still very much part of Lucid's day-to-day kind of price action. When it comes down to options, 1.41 million in calls, 927,000 in puts. 53% of all the options being done today were bullish in nature. So definitely good to see that the options is bullish, because that's something that wasn't really happening across the board. There's a lot of bearishness, and I think in many cases, rightfully so. So the fact that 53% was optimistic, definitely good to see. From a bulls standpoint, there's a consensus for it to be roughly around that $3 range going into next week. Bears anticipating for it to be kind of between that $2 and $2.50. So should make for a very interesting kind of time. And they do have their earnings again, so that'll be a crazy roller coaster. With it closing ultimately at 242, that does mean that the 250 and above strike prices are worthless. So that's kind of the downside of doing options, but nonetheless, you did have 2,000 at that $2 strike price. So that won't cause any bump up in the stock price or anything along those lines, unfortunately, but still, nonetheless, going into next week, there is roughly a big wall at 3 and then 350, but I'll touch on that in my weekend video. These are all the transactions occurring on the dark pools, so a lot of big transactions as per usual. So hedge funds and shorts like to use the dark pool. Then these are all the transactions occurring on the secondary market. So you did see a couple buys near the end of the day, which probably did help it kind of move higher. But aside from that, though, majority of which were sales. So I think a lot of that was stemming from just the negative algorithmic trading and just negativity in the broader market. But aside from that, though, with it closing at 242, it is between this pivot and this S1. So I'm looking at the 1-day chart on a side note. So these are very strong support and resistance points. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is obviously going into next week will be a crazy time. So 260 and then 207 will be strong support and resistance points. No new analyst ratings, no real articles coming out. I do anticipate a couple articles over this weekend to really talk about this right here. Even though, like I said, these are just estimates and only from the States, it still does leave you with a very big question mark on what does that truly mean. Is there some supply chain issue behind the scenes, or is there some error with this data right here? So let me know your viewpoint. But aside from all that, though, on the actual chart, you have 239 being that 50-day moving average and also 241 being that 100. So luckily enough, Lucid was able to close above that right here. Even though shorts were hitting it massively first thing, it was able to, for the most part, hold it, even though temporarily it did kind of break below that. But going into next week, very oversold, so that could really stand to benefit it if there is some good news or even let alone their earnings. So yeah, definitely. I know it was a pretty horrible week for the most part. So over the last week, Lucid did go down 16.12%, but at least it did close above that 50-day moving average. So let me know your viewpoint, and if you did buy Lucid, did you sell? Like, are you doing anything before going into their upcoming earnings, or are you just kind of holding what you have? One final thing, pop over to my Patreon if you are looking for some solid buy signals on stocks, options, crypto, many of which have been absolutely on point and bangers. Definitely worthwhile to pop over there and take a look. With all that said, appreciate all of you watching.